It's closing day. You're finally buying that first house. It's so exciting. You go to the final walkthrough first thing in the morning. You're so excited to see this house. You're going to start moving in. The moving van is packed. The U-Haul is packed. You're finally moving out of that apartment. But wait! The seller didn't make the repairs that they said they would during the inspection time period. What will you do? Well, I'm Ben Weaver, Illinois attorney. I help folks all over the Chicagoland area buy and sell houses. I also help them with wills and trusts and other estate plan documents. And today we're going to talk about what happens when the seller does not complete the repairs they promised to do during the inspection. All right, so this perspective is from the Chicago area with the Chicago area contract. It may be very similar to what happens in Oklahoma or Ohio or Oregon, but we really only know about the Chicago area contract here. So things may be a little different if you're watching this in another part of the country. But in the Chicagoland area, the buyer and seller agree to a price and they sign that contract, and within that contract, the buyer has 5 business days to complete a home inspection. Depending on the circumstances, the buyer may have a right to ask the seller to make repairs after the home inspection. Now, there are some exceptions here. The buyer can agree to buy the house as is. There's also another paragraph within the contract where the buyer can agree to have a home inspection for their information only, but not ask for any repairs. We're assuming that the buyer and the seller sign the paragraph in the contract where the buyer and seller agree to have a home inspection and to make repairs afterwards. So, after the home inspection, the buyer has a list of items that they would like to have repaired. The buyer's attorney presents it to the seller's attorney, and the parties negotiate a little bit. The seller rarely ever agrees to address everything on that inspection list. They may pick and choose. It's where you have to be careful at this point. You don't want to have a huge laundry list because it gives the seller a chance to just pick the 5 easiest things on that list and say they're not going to do anything else. But the parties negotiate over those inspection requests and they come to an agreement, and 99.99% of the time, the buyer and the seller agree that a professional is going to address these issues throughout the house. It might be something as serious as a radon, elevated radon levels, or an active leak they found in the basement, or it may be something as relatively easy to fix as, say, a slow drain in the bathroom sink. Either way, 99.99% of the times, the seller and buyer agree that a professional is going to repair those issues prior to closing, and the seller will provide a paid receipt before the closing. All right, let's get back to our scenario. It's closing day, you're at the walkthrough, and you realize the seller never addressed those issues. You're going through the house, there's still an active leak in the basement, there's still a hole in the roof. None of these things were completed as they agreed to. You ask about the receipts. They don't have any paid receipts because they didn't have anyone to address the issue. So what next? Well, I know your whole life is packed up in a U-Haul right now, and you're very excited about buying the house, but this is a breach of contract. Most likely, if the seller did not address these issues in this hypothetical, you can cancel the contract and walk away. You get the earnest money back and you start over. Most buyers in these types of shoes do not want to walk away from the contract. They're overall more excited about buying the house than anything else. And unfortunately, it leaves them in a bind because they're not going to walk away from the contract. The seller breached the contract, but they can't afford to walk away. So no matter what, the seller knows that they're going to move forward with the closing. So what happens next? So the parties involved, usually both attorneys, usually both realtors, will start talking. We'll try to negotiate some sort of a credit or agreement, maybe an escrow, so that these things can be addressed after closing. You know, it's interesting that realtors and attorneys represent both buyers and sellers. So they've usually been on both sides of the table here. almost every buyer's attorney in this situation has also represented a seller who's been very stubborn and just refused to get something done, and now has to act all tough at the closing because that's what his client wants to do. And just about every seller's attorney who's represented a seller and is acting all tough has also represented a buyer who's trying to get things done, because basically what I'm trying to get at is that most of the attorneys and realtors understand the other position, and we're all just trying to work out the issue. All right, so usually the parties at this point, we're at the closing, it comes down to money. The seller didn't get the work done, they're not going to get the work done. So either the parties agree to some sort of credit, or the parties agree to set up an escrow so that the work can be done, and then any money remaining will go back to the seller once the repairs are completed. It puts the responsibility on the buyer, because now the buyer has to get the work done. But sometimes this can be a good thing, because obviously the seller was kind of a bum and didn't get the work done anyway. So would you really trust whatever professional they hired to get the work done? Now you as the buyer get to hire your preferred contractor to make sure the job is done right the first time, instead of getting some handwritten receipt from who knows who, and then trying to call that number in 2 months and finding out the phone number's been disconnected, and it's a big headache. So all in all, we will keep working on this till it's resolved. If you're a buyer, you can walk away from the deal if you're so inclined. Usually buyers don't, because they want to buy the house more than anything else. So what we do is we work on either a credit or an escrow so that we can close today, we can get the repairs done, and everyone can finalize the deal. Seller gets the money, buyer gets the house, and we're all smiles at the end of the closing. So any questions, leave it in the comments below. I'm Ben Weaver, Illinois attorney, and I'll see you in the next video.